He wasn't just my brother, he was my other half. From our parents' garage in a quiet Austin suburb, we built a tech empire, a dream forged in code and trust. I was the architect, he was the visionary. Then, overnight, he erased me. He stole my life's work, my future, and told the world I was nothing. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would disappear. But what happens when the man you destroyed knows every secret, every digital backdoor you left behind? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a financial crime investigation fueled by revenge. To learn how I uncovered his darkest secret and dismantled his entire world, piece by piece, you have to hear what I did next. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch. The password was Valhalla Rising 2015. I know, a little dramatic, but Julian always insisted our internal project names had a certain grandeur. He called it aspirational branding. I just thought it was pretentious. For 8 years, Valhalla Rising 2015 was my digital key to the kingdom. It was the master administrator password for every server, every database, every line of code that constituted Athelred Technologies, the company we built from nothing in our parents' stiflingly hot Austin garage. And on a Tuesday morning in May, under a sky the color of a faded blueprint, the login prompt simply read, "Authentication failed." I typed it again, slowly, BLLHALLA. My fingers knew the sequence better than they knew my own phone number. Authentication failed. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't a server glitch. A glitch throws a 503 error or a timeout warning. This was a digital deadbolt. Someone had not just locked the door. They had changed the very shape of the keyhole. I tried my secondary credentials. Blocked. My emergency backdoor access, a little snippet of code I'd hidden deep in the kernel, a secret only I knew. It had been patched. Wiped clean. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a lockout, this was an exorcism. Someone had gone through our digital cathedral and systematically scraped every trace of my presence from the walls. There was only one person on this planet with the access, the authority, and the audacity to do that. My brother, Julian. You have to understand our dynamic. Julian was the sun. I was the planet caught in his orbit, quietly spinning, providing the gravity that kept his entire solar system from flying apart. He was 2 years older, blessed with a toothpaste commercial smile, the kind of effortless charisma that made investors write 7-figure checks on cocktail napkins. He was the visionary, the frontman, the storyteller. I was the engineer, the grunt. While he was out giving TED-style talks about the future of algorithmic synergy, I was in the server room, literally elbow-deep in coolant and wiring, making sure the future he was selling would actually boot up. Our parents adored him. He was the golden child, the one destined for greatness. I was reliable, dependable. Good old Leo. When Julian would come home with a C- on a report card, my father would laugh and say, "That's my boy, too busy dreaming to waste time on homework." When I won the state science fair for a rudimentary AI I'd programmed, my mother patted my head and said, "That's nice, dear. Now go help your brother with his history project." For years I didn't see it as malice. It was just the way things were. Julian was the story and I was, at best, a footnote. And I accepted it because I loved him. I believed in the myth of Julian as much as he did. I thought his success was my success, our success. That belief was the foundation of Athelred. He had the idea, a vague concept of a predictive analytics engine for the logistics industry. I spent 18 months, fueled by cheap coffee and the naive certainty of a 24-year-old, turning his vaporware pitch into a tangible working product. We were a perfect partnership, or so I told myself. He sold the dream. I made it real. When the first big contract came in, he bought a Porsche. I upgraded our server rack. When we made the cover of a tech magazine, his face was on the front. I was quoted once, on page 87, as a key member of the development team. He'd clap me on the back, his eyes shining with what I mistook for shared pride. "We're doing it, Leo. We're really doing it." And I'd smile back, ignoring the little voice that whispered, "No, he's doing it. You're just the guy turning the wrenches." It was a classic case of cognitive dissonance. My heart believed in the partnership, in the brotherhood. But my brain was logging every instance of inequality, every time he said I when he should have said we. but I'd push it down. The alternative, that my own brother, my other half, was just using me, was too monstrous to contemplate. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Julian. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Leo," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Morning. Hey, listen, there's a bit of a weird situation. The board called an emergency session this morning." "The board?" "The board consisted of me, him, and 2 early investors who always voted with Julian." "What? Why wasn't I told?" "It all happened very fast," he said, the faint apology in his tone making my skin crawl. "There were some irregularities found in the Q4 financials. Some discrepancies in the R&D accounts." I could feel the blood draining from my face. The R&D accounts were my domain. I managed the budgets for hardware, software licenses, personnel. "What are you talking about, Julian? I file those reports every month. You sign off on them." I know. And I told them, I said, "Leo is meticulous. It has to be a mistake. But, well, it looks a little messy, buddy. It looks like funds were being routed to unaudited vendor accounts. Shell corporations almost." He let that hang in the air, a poisonous cloud. He was describing his own actions, his own secret architecture of theft, and pinning it on me. It was gaslighting of the highest order, a psychic assault so audacious my mind struggled to even process it. "That's insane," I stammered. "That's a lie. You know it is." "Let me in the system. I can prove it. I can run a trace and show you exactly where every dollar went." There was a pause, not a hesitant pause, but a dramatic one. A calculated beat of silence designed to let the gravity of the situation crush me. "That's the other thing, Leo," he said, his voice now tinged with a theatrical sadness. "Given the potential for digital tampering, the board voted to suspend your access indefinitely." The floor fell away, indefinitely. It wasn't a technical issue, it was a coup. "The board? You mean you did this?" I had to recuse myself for the sake of impartiality, he lied, the words flowing from him with practiced ease. "This was their decision, Leo." My hands were tied. "They've brought in a forensic accounting team. Look, I'm sure it's all a big misunderstanding, just lay low for a bit. Let this blow over, I'll handle it. I'll protect you. The same words he'd used when he'd taken the blame for a window they both broke as kids, leading me to feel indebted and grateful. He was framing me for a crime he committed, and in the same breath positioning himself as my savior. It was the work of a master manipulator, a narcissist so committed to his own narrative that reality itself was just a script to be edited. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the screen. My entire world had been built on a foundation of trust in one person. And that person had just dynamited the foundation, stolen the rubble, and sent me the bill for the demolition. I was locked out, not just from my work, but from my own life story. He was trying to erase me, to turn me into a ghost in the machine I had built. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic calls to our company lawyer, who suddenly wasn't my lawyer anymore, and desperate attempts to find a way back inside my own creation. But Julian had been methodical. He'd spent months, maybe years, laying the groundwork for this, creating a paper trail of falsified emails and doctored financial requests that made it look like I was either grossly incompetent or deliberately criminal. He had built a cage for me out of my own work, and I had handed him the tools to do it. The final, crushing blow came a week later. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. Inside was a termination agreement. It cited gross financial misconduct and offered a paltry severance package in exchange for my shares in the company and a legally binding non-disclosure agreement. It stated that any attempt to contest the termination or disparage the company would result in immediate legal action, leveraging the evidence they had manufactured against me. It was checkmate. He had anticipated my every move. He knew I didn't have the financial resources to fight a legal battle against the company I co-founded, and he knew the threat of public humiliation and potential criminal charges would paralyze me. I was sitting on my sofa, the papers spread out on the coffee table, when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Leo, darling," she began, her voice strained. "Julian told me what happened. I'm so disappointed in you. After everything your brother has done for you, to put him in this position." I felt a bitter, acidic laugh bubble up in my chest. "What he's done for me? Mom, he stole the company. He's framing me." "Oh, Leo, don't be so dramatic," she sighed, a familiar refrain from my childhood. Julian explained everything. He said you were under a lot of pressure and made some poor decisions. He's not even angry, you know. He's doing everything he can to clean up your mess without it becoming a public scandal. You should be thanking him. And there it was. The final brick in the wall. My own family, so thoroughly enchanted by the myth of St. Julian, couldn't conceive of a reality where he was the villain. In their eyes, he could only ever be the hero, which meant, by default, I had to be the problem. My brother hadn't just stolen my company. He had stolen my past, my present, and my reputation. He had stripped me bare, and my own family was holding the door for him while he carried my life out into the street. I dropped the phone onto the cushion, the line still open, my mother's disappointed voice a faint, tinny buzz. I stared at the termination agreement. It was over. He had won. He had taken everything. At that moment, sitting in the deafening silence of my suburban home, I had never felt more alone or more helpless. A quiet, cold rage began to smolder in the pit of my stomach. It was a tiny ember in a wasteland of despair, but it was there, and it was all I had left. The first year was a free fall. Learned helplessness isn't a metaphor, it's a physical state. It's the feeling of lead in your bones, the taste of ash in your mouth. I sold my house in that manicured Austin suburb. The house I'd bought with the first real profits from Athelred, the one Julian had toasted at the housewarming, calling it a testament to our success. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I moved into a generic beige-walled apartment on the other side of town, the kind with a perpetual smell of stale curry in the hallways. I got a 9-to-5 job at a regional insurance company, troubleshooting printer jams, and resetting the passwords of people who still wrote them down on sticky notes. It was a Dantean level of hell specifically designed for a systems architect. I avoided my family. Their calls, dripping with pity and a condescending sort of encouragement, were like salt in the wound. Julian says he might have a junior position for you once this all blows over. My father offered once, as if it were an act of profound charity. The offer to become a janitor in the palace I had built was the single most insulting moment of my life. I stopped answering their calls. I cut the cord. The isolation was brutal, but it was cleaner than the slow poison of their disbelief. Julian, meanwhile, was ascending. Athelred, rebranded as JA Analytics, DA for Athelred, a final twisted tribute, was the darling of the tech world. He was on magazine covers, on financial news shows, lauded as a solo genius, a visionary who had streamlined his company for maximum growth. There was never any mention of a co-founder. In the official history of the company, I simply didn't exist. He had achieved a Stalin-level revision of history. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday, almost 2 years to the day of my ousting. I was scrolling through a tech news site during my lunch break, my sandwich tasting like cardboard when I saw it. A picture of Julian, his teeth impossibly white, his arm around a senator. The headline read, JAE, Analytics CEO Julian Athelred lands landmark federal contract. They were going to be handling logistics data for a massive infrastructure bill. It was a deal worth hundreds of millions. A deal that was only possible because of the back-end architecture I had designed for scalability. The system I had named Prometheus because it was meant to bring power to the people, to the users. Now, it was just making him richer, more powerful, more untouchable. Seeing that picture, something inside me snapped. The despair, the helplessness, the suffocating blanket of defeat. It all burned away in a single white-hot flash of pure, unadulterated rage. It wasn't just that he was successful, it was that he was successful with my work. He was a fraud, a parasite wearing the skin of a pioneer, and the world was celebrating him for it. The ember I had been nursing for 2 years roared into a furnace. He thought he had erased me, but he'd made one fatal mistake. He had forgotten who built the machine, and he had forgotten that the builder always knows where the weaknesses are. That night, I didn't sleep. I dug out my old hard drives, the ones I'd compulsively backed up for years out of professional habit. I fired up an old laptop, a ghost of a machine running a secure, untraceable operating system. It was time to go back into the cathedral. Not through the front door, which was barred to me, but through the catacombs. Julian had been thorough in wiping my official access, but he was a front man, not an architect. He knew how to sell the system, but he didn't understand its soul. He had patched the obvious backdoors, the ones in the documentation. But he didn't know about the fail-safe compiler. It was a little piece of code I'd embedded deep within the system's core programming. A diagnostic tool that, if activated with a very specific 256-character cryptographic key, would create a temporary, invisible user with root-level access. It was my emergency break glass in case of nuclear war protocol. And Julian's coup definitely qualified as a personal nuclear war. For the first time in 2 years, I felt a flicker of my old self. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The code was still there, dormant, waiting. I entered the key, the screen flickered, and a single line of text appeared. Failsafe protocol engaged. Welcome back, architect. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I was in. My revenge was not going to be a clumsy emotional outburst. It was going to be a financial crime investigation, a meticulous, patient, and utterly devastating deconstruction of the empire he had stolen. He had used the language of finance and law to destroy me. I would use the language of data and code to return the favor. For the next 3 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Leo, the sad sack at drone. By night, I was a digital phantom, slipping through the veins of his company, invisible and omniscient. I started where he'd framed me, the R&D accounts. I traced the money. Just as I suspected, Julian had created a web of shell corporations, registered in Delaware and Panama, with names like Innovate Solutions and Future Forward Ventures. He'd been siphoning money for years, small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums, routing them through these phantom vendors for consulting services that never happened. It was classic embezzlement, clean and simple. This was the evidence he was going to use to frame me. But I kept digging, because the amount of money was excessive. Far more than was needed to just buy a few Porsches and live a life of luxury. There was something else going on, a deeper rot. The plot twist, when it came, was both more pathetic and more destructive than I could have ever imagined. I found the final destination of the money. It wasn't going into a secret hedge fund or a vault in the Cayman Islands. It was being wired, twice a month, to a high-stakes online gambling syndicate based out of Macau. My brother, the visionary, the charismatic leader, was a gambling addict, a degenerate. All of it, the lies, the theft, the betrayal. It wasn't some grand Machiavellian power play. It was the desperate, panicked scrabbling of an addict trying to feed his disease. He had leveraged our entire company, my entire life's work, as his personal ATM to cover his losses. The federal contract wasn't a victory lap for him, it was a bailout. He needed that massive infusion of cash to keep his house of cards from collapsing. I had it. The smoking gun. The whole story, the embezzlement, the shell corporations, the gambling addiction. I could have gone to the authorities. I could have sent it all to a journalist. But that felt too impersonal, too clean. It made my destruction personal, and my response had to be the same. It needed to be precise. It needed to be surgical. I compiled my findings into 2 carefully curated digital packages. The first package contained only the evidence of the shell corporations and the initial embezzlement. I encrypted it and sent it, anonymously, from a public library computer to one specific person, Marcus Thorne, the lead investor at the venture capital firm that had just co-signed the financing for the new federal contract. Thorne was notoriously risk-averse, a shark who could smell blood in the water a mile away. I knew that even a hint of financial impropriety would cause him to launch his own aggressive audit, freezing Julian's assets and gutting his reputation from the inside. The second package was different. It contained everything. The embezzlement, the shell companies, and detailed, irrefutable proof of the gambling addiction, including transaction logs and IP addresses. This one I sent, also anonymously, to the IRS's whistleblower office. I knew a federal investigation, especially one tied to a major government contractor, would be slow. But it would be a grinding, inescapable glacier that would eventually crush everything in its path. Then, I sat back and waited. It took less than a week. The first tremor was a press release, buried on a financial wire, stating that JA Analytics was restructuring its financial leadership pending an internal review. Thorne was making his move. A week after that, the stock price wobbled. Then it plunged. Rumors began to leak on tech forums about frozen assets and a federal inquiry. Julian's empire was beginning to crumble. The final confrontation happened on a Thursday night. There was a frantic, desperate pounding on my apartment door. I opened it to find Julian. He looked like a ghost. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild with panic and rage. "You," he hissed, his voice cracking. "This was you." I didn't say anything. I just leaned against the doorframe, feeling a profound, icy calm I hadn't felt in years. This was boundary formation in its purest form. I was no longer the scared little brother. I was a sovereign nation, and he was a failed state knocking at my border. "How could you do this to me?" he screamed, his voice echoing in the cheap hallway. "To your own brother, I'm ruined. Everything is gone." I looked at him, at this man who had been the sun of my world, and for the first time I saw him clearly, not as a giant but as a small, hollow man, terrified of his own reflection. "You're not ruined because of me, Julian," I said, my voice even and steady. "You're ruined because of you. You did this. You made your choices. The gambling, the stealing. You built this prison for yourself. All I did was turn on the lights." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The myth of his own genius was finally crashing down around him, and he couldn't process it. He had spent his life believing his own lies, and now, confronted with the stark, unedited truth, he simply short-circuited. "I gave you everything," he finally whispered, a last, desperate attempt at gaslighting. I almost laughed. "No, Julian," I said, and I felt the last chain of my old life break. "I gave you everything. My work, my trust, my loyalty. And you burned it all to stay warm for one more night. Now, you're on your own. Get out of my building." I closed the door on his stunned face. The solid click of the lock, the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just a door, it was the end of a chapter, the end of him. I never saw him again. The legal and financial fallout was catastrophic for him. He lost the company, was buried in lawsuits, and the IRS investigation ended with him facing years of legal battles. My name was never publicly connected to it. As far as the world knew, the visionary just imploded. I didn't get my old life back, but I didn't want it. I used the money from my old house and a small settlement I eventually won from the company's bankruptcy to start my own firm. It's small. It's just me and 2 other engineers. We don't have a fancy office or a pretentious name. We just do good work, honest work. Some days I'll be debugging a line of code and I'll pause,